Hello and welcome to SpyHards podcast, where your hosts go deep undercover into the world of spy movies to decipher which films make the knock list. But remember, this information is strictly for your ears only. I'm Agent Scott.
And I'm Cam the Provocateur. And Scott, Peter recommended you.
It was a bad choice.
I agree. I am not agreeing with what Peter recommended at all at this very moment.
Peter's getting a 1-star recommendation.
His Yelp reviews are about to take a downturn, if you know what I mean.
Stay clear of Cam's Google reviews, folks. They are lethal.
I'm an assassin with a keyboard.
Yeah. Only there, though. He wants the protection of the screen, of course.
I was about to say typewriter, and that is just so sad.
That's so you, though, isn't it? Like, it's clickety-clackety, the typewriter. That's, well, I'm glad you graduated to typewriter.
I know. I'm like Tom Hanks, though. I collect typewriters.
Oh, yeah, he does do that, doesn't he?
Yeah, he does, yeah.
That's a fun.
Loves James Bond movies and collects typewriters. So me and Tom, eye to eye.
I've always said you and Tom Hanks should be best buddies.
I know. Bosom buddies.
Bosom?
He was on that TV show for years.
No, but it's like, wait, am I pronouncing it right?
I don't know. Maybe
bosom?
I'm pronouncing it wrong. Who knows?
No, you're right. Bosom. I would say
Yeah.
bosom, and you pronounced the O more. Bosom.
Yeah, I think I said it wrong. I think you're right.
Yeah. Well, that's often the case. But is it bosom? Is it bosom? Let us know, folks. What everyone needs a bosom for a pillow.
That's right.
Well, we are back with another episode as per. But before we get to that, we need to induct another member of the secretive and elusive SpyHards Die-Hard circle. So how do you become a SpyHards Die-Hard, Cam?
Well, you leave a review for us on Apple Podcasts, giving us a 5-star review and telling us what you like about the show or what you even love about the show, and then we read it on air, and you are inducted into the SpyHards Die-Hards.
Yep, we don't edit these, folks. They are going in as you write them, and this week's 5-star review comes from Mr. Vinny H007, and he writes, "Excellent podcast. These guys are terrific. Always a fun time listening to them as they venture into the spy genre. Truly a shining example of one hell of a podcast. Would recommend this podcast to everyone. Happy to call these guys friends."
Very nice, very nice. Thank you so much, Vinny. And this week, I'm going to start a new trend with these SpyHards Die-Hards. It's like, this is like supposed to be like kind of a podcast spy agency, right?
Sure, okay.
So we are going to start assigning code names.
Oh.
And so this applies to everyone in the past. Everyone who's confused about what their code name might be, who's been read on the air. I'm going to answer that right now. Your code name is the name of the movie we are tackling that very week.
Ah.
And so Vinny has a very amusing code name, but a great one nonetheless.
I mean, to be fair, like, as a code name goes, if I was going to pull out a dossier on a potential agent and I saw this as their code name, I'd be pretty chuffed for them.
Yeah. And so, like, the person who got, their review read on the Leon, the Professional episode really gets to choose Leon or the Professional, or they can have both. Either way. But other ones, recently, Ghosted, that's not a bad code name. Agent Ghosted.
Agent Ghosted. I'm not so sure with Agent Cats and Dogs 2, The Revenge of Kitty Galore.
I would say they either get Agent Kitty Galore or Agent Paws Unite.
I think we all know what they're picking. But
I think so.
Yeah, I think that's a great way of doing it and giving everyone a lovely alias. A little bonus you get for becoming a SpyHards Die-Hard. You get an official SpyHards alias too. Look at what we're giving out, all these things. You can put it on a name badge and wear it around town. It'd make you a bad secret agent if you did, but you'd be showing your colours loud and proud. So, Vinny, welcome to the SpyHards Die-Hard. If you want to become a SpyHards Die-Hard and get your own code name, leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. We will get notified and we will read them out on air. Write whatever you'd like in it, as long as it's 5 stars and it's fun, we'll read it out on the show. But Cam, I think it's time to not only share what Vinny's code name is, but get to the film itself. Here we are, Cam. It's time to talk about this week's film, but what is the film?
We are talking about 1967's The Naked Runner, which is a hell of a code name there, Vinny. And this movie stars Frank Sinatra and was directed by Sidney J. Furie, the director of The Ipcris File.
Oh.
Hello, darkness, my old friend.
do, 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 do. I could already feel a migraine coming on. Here we go. Okay. No, it's an interesting film to look at, and it's one of those ones that feels like it's not lost to time because it's a 60s film. Like, people know it exists, and it's got Frank Sinatra in it. People know who that guy is. So I'm looking forward to tackling it with you, Cam. But for those of you who haven't caught the film, and I will add, it's actually available on YouTube worldwide for free. So if you haven't seen the film yet and you want to check it out, you can go and grab a copy of The Naked Runner on YouTube right now. I'll see if I can put it up on our page as well.
Yeah.
And there'll be links in the show notes below.
Yes, there's some sort of distribution issue with The Naked Runner because it's owned by Frank Sinatra's film company, and it has quietly disappeared over the years. If you look it up on Letterboxd, I think it has so few views that it doesn't even have like a numerical average grade on it. It's got like some reviews on there, but that was something I don't think I've ever seen before for like a major release. So it's interesting how you can have a movie like this that I've known the name of for a long time. I've heard of this film, and it is readily available on YouTube in multiple formats, widescreen or close cropped 4:3 format, but it doesn't seem like a lot of people have seen it.
Interesting. Well, let's get into that and maybe figure out why a little bit. But before we get there, here is your synopsis. And Cam, I have a warning sticker to put on this one.
Is there a ... more?
There certainly is.
More nakedness.
Unfortunately, this synopsis is actually more of a marathon than a run.
Oh, okay.
The Naked Runner. They found the key to Sam Laker. They wound it up good and tight, and then they turned him loose.
Okay.
That's pretty cool. I don't mind
that.
It's
not bad, but it's like really like selling something with a lot of energy.
Yeah. It's not selling what the film is. I don't think there is a very tightly wound protagonist in this film, which we'll get to, but here is the rest of the synopsis. Sam Laker is an American industrialist working in Britain who has been awarded an international award for industrial design. He is planning to travel to East Germany to attend a trade show and show off his invention, taking his 10-year-old son with him on holiday. Is his invention a chair?
Yes.
But he didn't invent the chair.
No, but he designed the specific chair that he won the award for.
It used the word invention. I'm taking it to whoever wrote this synopsis.
Sure. I mean, but it's like if you created the Lazy Boy, you're the inventor of the Lazy Boy. It doesn't mean you invented chairs.
You're right, Cam. You're right. But here is the rest of it. Meanwhile, a British intelligence officer who served with Laker in the Second World War decides to use the opportunity of Laker's trip and his lack of an intelligence profile to coerce ... more. Oh. Him into carrying out an assassination.
That's a real cheat of a ... more. But yeah, I think that outlines the plot fairly well. I mean, it is at its core a very simple movie. It gets complicated in the telling, but in terms of what the specific goal of the movie is, very basic and not really akin to the Ipcris File, which I think has much more of a complex story it's trying to tell.
Yeah, in terms of the plot, they're chalk and cheese between the two. It's not really a straight comparison between the Ipcris File and The Naked Runner. It's more just the people who created it are the same.
Yeah, and I would say like there are other elements that are very similar, but in terms of plotting, they are quite different.
Yeah, and we'll probably get into charting that a little bit, but as we both said at the top, it sounds like I certainly hadn't seen this film, and you hadn't come across this one either.
No, it was one that I definitely come across multiple times on YouTube. I'm every now and again I'm known for this classic Cam. But
what a Cam thing to do.
Maybe at like 11 o'clock at night on a night off or something, scrolling through YouTube for older movies that are just free on, to watch.
Oh, that Cam.
Yeah. I've come across many things on there that I've watched and enjoyed, including the Frank Sinatra movie Suddenly, that I watched maybe like less than a year ago and actually quite enjoyed. Another assassination thriller that is actually quite similar to this movie in a lot of ways.
Did it come before or after this?
Before, it was in the
Okay.
50s.
Right, okay.
And so like I had definitely seen The Naked Runner listed, and it was one where I was always like, I should watch that because I've definitely heard of this movie. But when I realized it was a spy thing, it just basically got added to our master list, and I thought, okay, I'll get to it when I get to it.
And I've had it mentioned to us on social media before whenever I'm talking about the Ipcris file.
Yeah.
People will bring this one up as sort of like a comparison point, or like an American version of the film, despite this being a mostly British production.
Yes, right, yeah.
But other than that, I had nothing going into it. I'm a big Rat Pack fan. I'll add that bit of context. So the idea of talking about a Frank Sinatra film is quite fun from that perspective, because we love a bit of Dean Martin on this show, and Dean Martin is often referencing Frank Sinatra in the Matt Helm film. So it's nice to see old Blue Eyes finally on the show.
And as we are closing out 2023, I think we kind of have to say that this was kind of the Rat Pack year for SpyHards, covering so many of the Matt Helms within 2023, plus ending it, or pretty close to ending it, with a Frank Sinatra vehicle. Going forward, we'll have other entries from at least Frank Sinatra. We'll do Manchurian Candidate one day, but we'll never have as heavy a Rat Pack year, including actually Ocean's 11 on the Patreon that we did this year as well. So
True.
This kind of was a big year for that, that famous gang on SpyHards.
That famous gang. What a talking up that is. I'll put you on stage first to warm up the crowd. Guys, we've got that famous gang coming out. Let's get some noise for those blokes. Yeah, them.
Yeah.
Well, maybe a warm-up act is not in Cam's future, but let's talk about how this runner took his clothes off.
So, this movie was based on a 1965 novel by English writer Francis Clifford,
who was a nudist.
He was a famous nudist. That's what he's most famous for, not writing. Although he did write in the nude, also notably. But he's someone who
he liked the breeze.
And you can usually breeze through his novels pretty well too, so it all connects. But he was someone who wrote, several novels, but didn't have a lot of his work adapted into Hollywood. There's really only 3, and the other notable one was his novel Act of Mercy was adapted into the 1962 David Niven film Guns of Darkness, which I've never seen and had never really heard of, but this one follows that one, and this is probably the most famous of his film adaptations.
This is his most famous of his film adaptations?
Yeah, he just never really had his Robert Ludlum, Jason Bourne, home run kind of thing, or Tom Clancy. I mean,
just book fans out there, you have to let us know if he's a particularly big name in literary circles, because it's not one I've heard before.
Yeah, me neither. And the title, The Naked Runner, was actually taken from an Arthur Symons poem called In the Wood of Finvava, and there's a line that says, "A naked runner lost in a storm of spears."
Like Britney and Jamie Lee, or?
I suspect that's not what Arthur Symons was going for.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Whoopsie daisy.
Yeah. Yes. And so the person brought in to adapt this novel into a screenplay was Stanley Mann, who was a Toronto-born writer who we've actually talked about in the past. He wrote Eye of the Needle.
Oh.
And so that's kind of the connectivity there in terms of spy movies. But he got his start initially with a 1951 Canadian comedy film called The Butler's Night Off that was actually William Shatner's first ever film.
Was he the butler?
He was not the butler, unfortunately, no. He's like 4th or 5th billed in the movie.
Oh, so this is 1950s, early 50s then?
In 1951, yeah.
Oh, wow. That's a bright-eyed, bushy-tailed Bill Shatner right there.
Very young, yeah, early 20s. And so he went on and just did like a whole bunch of TV. He did a 1959 Peter Sellers movie called The Mouse That Roared, a 1965 drama called Rapture, and that led right into this film. And as I said, he would go on to do things like Eye of the Needle. He had a writing credit on Meteor, a movie we tackled on the Patreon, the Sean Connery disaster movie.
Really fun film.
Yeah, Damien, Omen 2, and Firestarter, and also Conan the Destroyer.
That's the Schwarzenegger film?
The second one, yes.
The second one?
Yeah, the one with Grace Jones, yeah.
I do not remember there ever being a second one.
Not great. And I mean, he would not have had sole credit, I would imagine, on that film.
Okay.
Yes.
Not selling me on that one, but that's okay.
No, that's where they toned it down to a PG. Like the first one's a real like R-rated, red-blooded kind of action movie, and the second one was like, let's make it for kids.
Okay. Yeah, not what you want from a Conan film, but please continue.
No, and so the person who was most crucial though to really getting this movie made was actor turned producer Brad Dexter, and Brad Dexter probably best known to many as appearing in the movie The Magnificent Seven as Harry Luck, one of the seven. And he was someone who was working with Frank Sinatra in Hawaii on a movie called None But the Brave. And Frank Sinatra almost drowned. He was out in the ocean, got caught in a wave, and in severe danger.
Wow.
And Brad Dexter went and actually saved his life. And Frank Sinatra was just like, I'm indebted to you. How can I help you? He made him the executive of his film company and would do everything he could to help him out. And so he's the reason, ultimately, that Frank Sinatra's in this movie. He was interested in this material, and Frank Sinatra was like, okay, I'll do it for you. And so Frank Sinatra got a $1 million salary, and he was also coming off two big bombs, Marriage on the Rocks and Assault on a Queen. So this was kind of a precarious time for him career-wise, at least in film.
I don't know about you, but if Frank Sinatra owed me a favor, I'm not sure I'd pull it in by saying, hey, I want to be in your next film.
Well, if this was, I believe, Brad Dexter's first producer job on a major motion picture.
Sure.
So maybe it's like, I want Frank there because that's going to help hopefully lead to a hit.
Sure. Yeah, no, he's got the name value. You put his name on a poster, people will turn up in those days, I imagine. I don't know. I think I would call it in and just ask to do a stage show with him and Dean Martin.
I guess, although Brad Dexter, I don't know that he was much of a singer.
I'm putting myself in that position. Like, what would I do?
Oh,
like,
okay.
I could sing with Dean and Frank. Like, I could put a show on. I'd love to just be up on stage with those two. That would be a memory for life.
Oh, no kidding, right?
Yeah.
And Frank Sinatra was actually a fan of the Ipcress File, and so he was interested in working with Sidney. He was interested in working with Sidney J. Furie, who we tackled in the past, of course, with the Ipcress File, but Toronto-born as well. He's obviously a director who got his start with a 1957 spicy teen movie called A Dangerous Age. And I looked up A Dangerous Age, and the poster's amazing. And I'm just going to read the text from the poster. Forbidden. They had tasted life and love. No longer adolescents. Not yet adults. Young emotions laid bare.
That sounds provocative. Is there like is there some kissing on the poster?
Oh, yes. Very steamy looking kissing going on. It's totally following in the wake of like Rebel Without a Cause.
Right.
Where teenagers are a thing that are now being acknowledged as a cultural force and adults are scared of them.
There's some real snuggle-huggling going on that poster.
Yes, and actually James Bond regular Shane Rimmer is credited as appearing in that film. Not as one of the teens, though.
I was going to say, is his chest out on the poster?
Doesn't appear to be.
Okay.
But Sidney J. Furie, after that movie, did a whole handful of movies. None of them really struck gold until 1965's The Ipcress File, which obviously is very acclaimed, made the knock list. We tackled it very early on in the run of the show. And this was his follow-up to a Western called The Appaloosa, which was his follow-up to The Ipcress File. So this was very shortly after Ipcress. And so you basically had Ipcress in 65, this in 67. And he worked right till 2018. He did the Iron Eagle films, he did Superman 4, and a lot of direct-to-video action later in his career.
Wait, Sidney J. Furie did Superman 4?
That's correct, yes.
Wow. I mean, I know that was like a reclamation project with Canon that was falling to pieces. I'm not sure I could blame it necessarily on him, but that film is a mess.
It's so weird to look at his career, because when I look at the Ipcress File and I look at this movie, there is such a specific style going on.
Yeah.
And then you look later in his career, and it's a lot of kind of disposable comedies and a lot of direct-to-video action movies, and then obviously stuff like the Iron Eagles, which are kind of trashy, as you said, like kind of canon film material.
Well, like his last film is called Drive Me to Vegas and Mars.
Yeah,
I'm not even sure what that is.
I
That's
have no idea.
all right. Yeah, I'm just looking for his last sort of 20, 30 years. It's just a lot of what I would call straight to DVD, or it feels like it's straight to DVD.
Yeah, and I mean, I was actually shocked to find out he was still alive. I didn't
Yeah.
realize he was, because I just think director on the Ipcris file, there's no way, but he's still around.
So what you're saying is I should send him an email.
If he'll answer.
I'll send the email. We'll see how it goes.
Sure.
Hmm.
And he brought along with him into this project Ipcris file cinematographer Otto Heller, who's a very acclaimed cinematographer, and you can see how the style's carrying between the two. There's a lot of continuity visually.
Well, that's the point I was going to make then, because Superman 4 doesn't look like the Ipcris file,
No.
but this does.
Yes.
There's a definite attempt to keep the style the same between those two films. I'm guessing that was probably more the combination of the cinematographer and Sidney J. Furie.
I think it was like the two of them working together, and when you're looking, I think, at that 1960s spy movie landscape,
Mm-hmm.
they are trying to do something different. The Ipcris file stood out for a reason. I think they're trying to put their own unique stamp on the genre in what I would imagine would be a very crowded marketplace.
Well, this is 67. This is the same year as Casino Royale, You Only Live Twice, which is actually bonkers when you think about it.
I know, right? And I think there's also at least one Matt Helm film, maybe two.
Is this the year where there's two, or is that 66?
Maybe 66. It may have had Murderer's Row and the first one out.
Yeah, because it was 66, wasn't it? That was the pun.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah.
But yeah, like this is. I think there was a Flint film out around now as well. Like it's all going on this year.
Yeah.
I think we looked at it once. 66 or 67 is like the year for spy movies in the 60s. It's the height of spy mania.
Well, it's because of Thunderball in 65
Mm.
is the one that just completely blows the doors off in terms of box office success.
Yeah.
And so that's a 2-year window for everyone to start launching every spy property they've got, right?
Yeah, I mean, like I'd have to look it up, but like I'm sure Modesty Blaze is coming out around about this time as well. Like I'm sure like stuff like The Liquidator is all bubbling around about now. So yeah,
The Liquidator is bubbling.
I didn't
Very
even
nice.
I didn't even do that purposely. That's a freebie there, folks. You can keep that one.
Yeah. And so I mentioned, Frank Sinatra. He owed kind of a favor to Brad Dexter and so appeared in this movie. But I don't know that Frank Sinatra was fully committed to this project.
Okay.
So they'd been shooting for a while in Europe. And Frank left the production to perform at a rally for California's Democratic governor, Pat Brown, who was running in the 1966 gubernatorial election against Ronald Reagan. And, once Sinatra had performed that concert, he decided, you know what? I don't really want to go back to Europe. Can we just, do the rest of my scenes, perhaps in LA on a soundstage? And, they weren't necessarily the most thrilled about that.
No, I could imagine they weren't particularly happy about having to move the entire production to a different continent.
Mm-hmm.
That seems like a bit of a pivot.
Yes.
Not necessarily something a happy actor would be doing.
I don't know how many scenes he had left to shoot. So there may have just been some interiors that they managed to shoot in LA.
Okay.
It's very muddy. Like, the thing with the behind the scenes on this movie is there is no really definitive account written about it. I had to go through a lot of individual news articles about participants who worked on the movie and getting snippets here and there.
Mm-hmm.
So I found it very hard to nail down actual specifics as to whether they did do the interiors in LA or whether they had to talk Frank Sinatra into coming back. And I saw kind of both versions of this, reported.
But you did spend half an hour clarifying the word gubernatorial.
I did. This may have been the most research time put into a movie in quite a while, just because of the fact usually you can go to AFI or Turner Classic Movies and they'll have a pretty thorough breakdown that you can use as a skeleton.
Yeah.
This movie was just nothing.
Maybe that's another sort of note you have in your behind the scenes going forward, but there does seem to be an interesting legacy with this film.
Yeah. Oh, there is. And so, I mentioned, that Brad Dexter and Frank Sinatra, they had this bond because, Brad Dexter had saved his life.
Mm-hmm.
Their friendship fell apart over the course of this production.
Sure.
And ultimately, the thing, the straw that broke the camel's back was that Frank Sinatra was engaged to Mia Farrow at the time, who was 30 years his junior. She was about 20. And Brad Dexter was like, dude, this is a bad idea.
Yeah.
And Frank Sinatra was like, I'm done with you. Goodbye.
Wow. It's not a lot of sticking with your friends there, I guess.
No, and him and Mia Farrow did get married, and they were together for about 2 years.
I wonder, because Frank Sinatra has a song called "You Make Me Feel So Young." I wonder if that's where that comes from.
It's entirely possible. Yeah, apparently him and Farrow were very close until the end of his life, but the marriage didn't last that long. And Brad Dexter, he was off to other pastures, I suppose.
Well, he did it his way.
That's right. So the movie was a modest success at the box office. I couldn't find actual numbers, but they did say it was profitable enough that it no one was embarrassed
Sure.
when this thing came out.
Better than the last two, if they were flops.
Yeah, he had like two legit bombs, and like this one was just kind of a modest performer.
Okay.
And the top three for the year, number one was The Graduate. Right there, The Graduate. You can kind of see Hollywood starting to change. The early seeds of where we're going to go in the 1970s are starting.
Mm-hmm.
Number two was The Jungle Book. And number three was Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. And a couple final notes. This was the final film Frank Sinatra ever made with Warner Brothers. Really speaks to how good an experience he had with The Naked Runner.
Well, I don't think you really mentioned it, but how did they solve the solution of him wanting to shoot the rest of it in LA?
It's muddy. And I was not clear after doing a lot of research whether he did do that and they actually shot interiors in LA or they convinced him to go back.
Because I had read, but I don't trust my sources, that he that they did the rest with stunt doubles.
That's the thing. It's like I came across things like that too, but they were all from unverified sources.
Interesting. Okay. Well, it's one of those ones that, again, I think you're going to explain in a minute. It's a complicated history, and probably that's a little bit of the reason why there isn't a storied TCM entry.
The thing is, when you read about just kind of the behind the scenes on this one, it wouldn't surprise me at all if they had to do that and did shoot his stuff in LA, just because it doesn't seem like the commitment level was that high, and it was kind of a rocky production just for him, and something that clearly, if he's walking away from Warner Brothers after this movie, he wasn't happy with this entire experience.
Sure. That's fair enough.
Yeah. And the final note, and this is maybe the greatest legacy that this movie has, the gun that Frank Sinatra uses, the Mauser C96, was ultimately used a handful of years later as Han Solo's blaster in Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope.
Now, I read this too, and I was convinced you were going to tell me that there was no verifiable sources on that one.
It's verifiable, yes.
Wow. So the actual prop gun that was used for this became the prop gun that Harrison Ford is wielding around in the prequels, in the original films.
That is correct, yeah. And so that marks the second spy movie prop that has had an impact on Star Wars, because, of course, we had the Dippy skeleton from one of our dinosaurs that is missing that stood in for a crate dragon in A New Hope, and now we have Han Solo's blaster.
We need to find one more to complete, like, the trifecta.
Oof.
We'll stumble across it naturally, I think, at some point. There'll be one more weird spy connection between that and Star Wars. But how funny that, like, two of our very earliest films, Ipcress File and One of Our Dinosaurs is Missing, is they're sort of now tied together by this film.
I know. Very strange, right?
Okay. I'm never going to look at that blaster the same way again now. I'm going to be like, hey, that was held by the guy who sent me to sleep.
Well, I was looking at the gun in the movie and going like, that looks like Han Solo's blaster. And this was before even looking up the information on it.
Mm-hmm.
But to me, it's like, I don't know, maybe that's just a generic gun type of that era.
It is an actual gun type. It's a Mauser. It is an actual gun that existed.
So I was like, well, I guess they used the same type of gun.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that this was actually a prop that was kicking around the archives for a while, and then ultimately was recycled.
Like the Ark of the Covenant. Just
yeah.
in a big studio somewhere.
Yeah.
Well, I find that to be utterly fascinating. That's the legacy of the film is this gun.
Yeah. I
Really?
think so. That and maybe the legacy of just maybe like just being Sidney J. Furie's other, big spy film.
So he had no other spy works during his career.
I don't think so off the top of my head. At least none that kind of had that like the
Gravitas.
prestige. Yeah, or just like, the fact he's working with like the biggest leading men of their time. Michael Caine wasn't when he hired him to do the Ipcress file, but give some time and Michael Caine is like one of the biggest stars of the era. So it's like those are kind of like the two big spy films of the at least the 60s for him. There may be something once you get to that that kind of desert that is the 80s where he's just cranking stuff out left, right, and center. Maybe there's something in there, but yeah. These are kind of the two notable ones.
No, that's fair enough, and it's interesting that I had no idea about that connection going into this, and that there was. I obviously people mentioned it online, but I didn't. When people had said to me this was like it's got a connection to the Ipcress file, it's kind of the same sort of thing. I thought maybe there was nods. I wasn't prepared for just how much of this being Ipcress file 2
Sure, yeah.
that there literally is. But let's get to it. I mean, the British bees are buzzing. The spy networks it's all getting a bit haywire. So let's talk about the Naked Runner. I'm actually genuinely curious because legendarily, one half of this show, one of the only spy movie podcasts in the whole world, doesn't like one of the greatest allegedly spy movies of all time in the Ipcress file. That's me. And then the other half of this show, Cam, loves it. Like I'm pretty sure that's like in your top 10 of spy movies of all time.
Oh, I don't know. It's so tough once you start factoring in all the Hitchcock stuff and my top tier Bonds. Like,
Sure.
I always find like top 10 lists impossible, but I hold it in very high regard. Yeah.
Sure. And then we stumble upon this film that is, for all intents and purposes, it's got a lot of similarities at the very least. For a lot of other ways, it's basically like some of the same shots are in this film. Like it really is aping off of itself. So I think I want to hear from you first, Cam, because you adore the Ipcress file. What was going into the Naked Runner like for you?
Such a weird sentence.
Did you throw your clothes off in reckless abandon and just, throw yourself into the Rhine? How did you feel?
Did I go frolicking with the Naked Runner? Scott, I thought I'd found love with the Ipcress file. And then I came across Naked Runner.
Oh my God.
No, I'm kidding. I did not really care for this movie very much.
I had a heart attack.
I know. I was like watching
there.
your all the blood just drain from your face. This movie I found incredibly frustrating. And I have a lot of good things to say about it when we talk about likes.
Mm-hmm.
I think Sidney J. Furie's style is so interesting. And it is very much a case, I think, of someone who is working with not great material and perhaps a leading man that is a little checked out, but doing everything he can to make this feel visually interesting and set in a world that is just very gritty and compelling to just kind of observe.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, in a lot of ways, I appreciate what he's going for with The Naked Runner, but my biggest issue is, like, this is a movie about a character that has no agency whatsoever. He's basically just pulled through the course of the movie, doesn't know what's going on at any point, and so you're just kind of like in this very passive position watching this character just kind of drag his butt from beginning to end. And I think like there's a lot of movies that kind of follow a similar pattern. You can look at one, not even a very good movie, Nick of Time with Johnny Depp from the 90s, where it's a very similar thing. A guy who is basically being set up to commit an assassination or else.
Right.
But the thing is, that is a character who's thinking, like, how do I get out of this? What do I have to do to survive? He's like trying to problem solve on his feet as you're kind of intensifying the situation. I did not get any sense of that through the movie. The Frank Sinatra character seems to be half asleep. And I just found it so unbelievably frustrating that it never felt like, despite, I'm sure, at its core, wanting to be a slow burn thriller, it never felt like it was moving.
Yeah, I don't think I can really fault a lot of what you said there. It's crazy to think about the caliber of performer you've got there, because people may not know, and I haven't got a lot of foundation, but I know from other people that Frank Sinatra is a genuinely good actor.
Oh yeah, you go back, to like From Here to Eternity. He won an Oscar for that.
Yeah.
Manchurian Candidate. He's fantastic. He can be incredibly charismatic on screen.
Yeah, and we mentioned the caliber of Sidney J. Furie. He's obviously got a track record that appeals to spy movie fans,
Mm-hmm.
and yet it doesn't come together here. It there feels like so many things that are missing. It's a bizarre experience, almost an out of body experience watching this film, and I watched it twice in a row. It's crazy that a film that purports itself in its title to be about running has no propulsion whatsoever.
Yeah.
It is so lackadaisical that it's basically horizontal. I don't understand where they thought they were going with this one, because is this Sinatra's performance here? Is this a direction? Is this another problem altogether? Is it the script? I don't know where it necessarily stumbles. Maybe we'll figure that out. But yeah, it's absolutely crazy that a film exists that actually makes me appreciate the Ipcress File.
Is it an issue that like Frank Sinatra's charisma, when it's focused, is just like incredible? And I don't mean he has to be like Mr. popping off the screen movie star, because this is clearly a more downbeat character, but just as a performer, he comes alive on camera.
Mm-hmm.
And like he's working with a very technical, stylistic director. And I wonder if it just doesn't play to his strengths, and maybe he just was not enjoying the experience when they're sitting there framing a camera, to shoot through crystals at his face, and he's going like, come on, guys, like, what are we doing?
Yeah, you've got the director and the cinematographer in the corner trying to get a lens to shoot through the handle of a briefcase to watch him shoot someone else in the distance. I mean, one of my issues with Ipcress File is the same thing here, but we'll come to that. So maybe, like, for Michael Caine, he was kind of left to create his own character and find his own mannerisms and kind of direct himself in many ways. Whereas I think maybe Frank needs a stronger director to get a performance out of him.
Or is it also that Michael Caine is a young up-and-coming talent who's hungry for something and willing to be more molded by a director on screen, and is like, oh, this is a complex kind of shoot they're going for? Okay, I'll make this work. Whereas like Frank Sinatra at this point, the man is a legend. He has been, in how many classic movies at this point in his career. And now he's sitting there kind of standing around waiting while they, as you said, frame through a briefcase. Is he just like, come on, I've got things I want to do. I want to go perform at this, this democratic, event.
But that's not to say that there isn't like moments of brilliance in this film, even with the sort of quirky. I mean, I said Dutch angles in that episode, and I never. Apparently, I taught people the meaning of the word Dutch angles in our Ipcress File episode. But jaunty camera angles, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
There's a moment where Frank Sinatra's character is taken out to the woods by Derren Nesbitt's character, Colonel Hartman, as if he's going to assassinate him. Shoot him in the back, and Frank Sinatra it goes to vomit. He's so panicked about the situation, he vomits and he leans forward. It's like a POV shot. He leans forward, and then you snap to another scene, and he sits back up again.
Yeah,
like it's beautifully framed. There's like an actual bit of like filmmaking going on here that they're actually trying to do something interesting with it, and there are moments like that sprinkled throughout the film. But none of it ever feels like it's ever stepping up to the level of Ipcress File. And what I noted down was I wonder if Sidney J. Furie and his cinematographer played all the hands they wanted to play with Ipcress File. So a lot of this has just felt like revision.
Yeah. Or was it that like also that they just had a better script to work from with Ipcress? Like the story there was just something that kind of drew you in. Whereas this one, they set up this whole like puppet motif pretty early on. They even mention, he's a marionette being controlled by strings. At a certain point, he even goes to a puppet theater, and I'm like, a little too on the nose there, Sidney J. Come on. We don't need to go quite that far. But like, if you have a lead character who is a puppet on strings and never seems to really fully realize that that's the case and try to cut the strings, that's not really a story. That's not particularly compelling. And the movie ends so unbelievably, hilariously abruptly that I was like, I mean, That's a choice. That is an all-timer choice.
That ending is, I mean, it's one of my dislikes. It's so frustrating. But in my head, once I read about what was happening behind the scenes, I actually attributed that to being they didn't have Frank to shoot additional scenes.
Possible, yeah.
It's so abrupt. It feels like it isn't what's in the script. It feels like it's literally like slapping the viewer in the face in the last second, saying, "All right, off you go."
I mean, it's literally Frank Sinatra being like, "This was a setup." Yup. Credits.
Get in the car. Okay.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Guess
Yep, all right.
everything's okay now, I guess.
Yeah. It is absolutely crazy, but I suppose just like for me. I made jokes about like it making me appreciate Ipcress File, and it does a little bit. This does actually make me kind of appreciate what they were doing with Ipcress File, because Ipcress File is just done better. But we shouldn't necessarily be just sitting here comparing the two, because they are different films. Sure, they're from the same filmmaker, but they're from different screenwriters, different lead actors, different strengths, different weaknesses. So I'll take that to one side for a second. What I think the problem is for me is this film is incredibly dull.
It is.
It's hour and 40 minutes, and there is a ticking clock in this film, and unfortunately I felt that clock on my watch ticking the entire time. I was so conscious of time moving in this film, and despite having moments, like I said, of brilliance to sort of shine through, I didn't care about the plot particularly. I think Sinatra's performance didn't grab me, so I didn't particularly care what happened to him. I cared more about his son. The character was more dynamic than he was.
I had an issue with the son thing, though, because they established very early on he's not in any danger. And so, like,
Sure, yeah.
if you are in the position of the Frank Sinatra character, it's better if the audience doesn't know what's going on with the kid.
Sure.
Because then it's like, oh, like, psychologically, you are now with him. We have that information. We know this kid is completely fine. And so then you're just, like, watching a guy be like, well, I guess my son is dead. So I better get revenge. But we're going like, well, no, we know what's going on. The kid's fine. And so it's just like, it's frustrating watching a character who doesn't have the information the audience does just kind of trudge through a movie.
That is frustrating. And one film I noted down in is a comparison point. I know we're not comparing it. Well, I want to try and not compare it to the Ipcress File too much. But in terms of what they're going for with the plot is Alan J. Pakula's The Parallax View.
Yeah.
Because you've got a lead who's far away from everything else, and he's been brought in, and he's trying to take something down, and he is sort of investigating. But the one thing that film does well is Alan J. Pakula. Is it who's the lead in that film? I'm forgetting the name.
Oh, Warren Beatty?
Warren Beatty, thank you. His character's investigation is throwing spanners in the works of the Parallax Company. So he's actually making a contribution to the story. He is changing dynamics and the flow of where it's going. Whereas Frank Sinatra's character here of, I keep thinking his name is Sam Laker, is as passive as it goes. He is literally just at the behest of everyone else in this film. And he is meant to be your superhero. He's framed as like this great guy at the beginning of the film. He wins an award for his chair design work. Like, it's a guy you want to be around. And he loves nudists as well, apparently, because that never comes up again. Or why he runs. He doesn't really run either. But yeah, I just found it incredibly dull. And I think like that's one of the biggest sins a film can have, is being dull. I'll take stupid and like badly acted any day over dull.
It's frustrating too, because I think of Manchurian Candidate, which we haven't covered yet on the show. But like, that movie's about brainwashing people to become assassins. And you have like the Lawrence Harvey character in that movie who had gone through that brainwashing, but he's someone who recognizes something's wrong. And there's like an internal struggle to that character over the course of the movie.
Right.
And like, that's interesting. There's no sense of that with the Frank Sinatra character. Like, yes, he's unhappy to be there, but he never really knows what's going on at all, like, through the entire course of the movie. He's not even, like, making an effort to connect puzzle pieces. He's just kind of, like, being led from one situation to another. And there's not even that moment of, like, a character that's having, like, a nervous breakdown. I like the way he played the scene where he got the information that his son was quote unquote dead. And like just the way he has his head down kind of in the foreground of the shot, like you could feel kind of the weight of that. Like you could see that Frank Sinatra was like, okay, I need to play this moment seriously, but it's not like the emotional journey of this character has any sort of like I feel like it ever really communicates to the audience through the rest of the journey. It's like individual moments, whether it is him, throwing up in the woods. Like I felt that. There'd be
Yeah.
sporadic moments where I'd go like, okay, he really nailed that moment. But as an emotional journey for 100 and what is it, like 100 minutes basically,
Yep.
it just felt like very blah, which as you said, like that's so frustrating to have to sit through, especially when the character journey is already kind of compromised by the storytelling,
Mm-hmm.
that to also not have a performance you can connect to fully, that's really rough.
Or like other things to look out for, like a great action sequence or something like that. Something you can like grab onto and be like, at least we have this. I just couldn't find anything like that particularly. But let's talk about the things that we did like, and that there are some. I have a couple. I think you had a few more. So why don't I throw to you first, Cam? What's something you really liked about The Naked Runner?
There were two performances in this movie I thought were fantastic.
I know where you're going.
Yeah, and they are Peter Vaughan as Martin Slattery, who is the British agent that basically sets up Frank Sinatra's character.
Yep.
There are so many scenes of him just like staring almost into the camera that are so unsettling. And this felt to me very Ipcris. Like the world this character lives in felt like something pretty closely attached to like what Michael Caine's world was in the Ipcris file. And honestly, he was so much more interesting to follow as he was like creating these machinations to, basically propel Frank Sinatra forward, that I was like, just give me that movie. Like, give me a movie about the inner workings of this guy and how he operates in his day-to-day, because I thought this performance was just masterful and it will stick with me. And the other performance was Derren Nesbitt as Colonel Hartman, who is this, East German agent that is collaborating with Slattery. And he has that kind of like almost like Bond henchman like look. He's, kind of the tall, blonde, good looking guy, but so intimidating. And you had that scene, as you mentioned earlier, where he's going to execute Frank Sinatra in the woods, like incredibly effective there. But there's also like a very dark humor to him. There's a bit where Frank Sinatra brings up like World War II, and he's like, oh, I wasn't able to join the SS. I didn't have that good fortune. I was too young. And it's this very like dark little bit of humor, but that kind of like continues with that character. There's always this kind of like sense of like, we know this guy is bad news, but we can't help but be completely like drawn in by him.
Well, there's a spark to him. There's almost a twinkle in Derren Nesbitt's eye.
Yeah.
The whole time, like you're almost drawn to watching him, and I think Peter Vaughan is the same. The character of Martin Slattery. If you told me he worked for Major Dolby or Colonel Ross, I would completely buy it. If there was a file on a desk that said Ipcris on it, like I would. That feels like that's the exact same universe, and that feels like and that has texture, that has a richness to it that feels like a real event, a real person that has existed, and that was how espionage was being conducted in the 1960s. Everything about that felt genuine, and also quite relatable. Like I mean, I'm not saying I often manipulate you into assassinating people, Cam, but I would know how to do it.
Sure, yeah, and everything about the world that Slattery lives in feels so like gritty and grounded and real.
Yeah.
Like it feels like a character that exists in a world that is interesting. And it has, that's like to me the closest connectivity with the Ipcris file, other than shot choices.
Yeah.
Is that like that world feels very similar to like when you watch the Ipcris file and you have Michael Caine going and observing people early in that movie. It's like a trashy looking apartment. It's not glamorous. It is kind of the reality of the spy world as depicted through, Sidney J. Furie's lens. And that's the world that Slattery lives in. And I just kept thinking, like, give me a movie about Slattery. Give me a movie about Colonel Hartman. These are interesting characters who have a point of view and a story that seems like it would be compelling to follow, as opposed to the chair salesman who's just really unhappy.
Yeah, and you got to think, like, I think Sidney J. Furie must have known he struck gold with Peter Vaughan, because the film opens with a shot of Peter Vaughan asleep to the side of the camera, and there's a whole credit sequence that plays next to him whilst he's asleep, and there's music playing in the background on a vinyl record, and then the phone rings and the plot begins, basically. But Peter Vaughan's been there the entire time, and you slowly see him like wake and then react to the phone, and it's all very subtly done, but there's like a menace to him immediately. Something's a bit weird with the guy, and then you find the depths that he's willing to go to get a person he considered a friend to do a horrific thing. Again, it's a wonderful character to see on screen, and a lot of people might not know the name Peter Vaughan. It might not jump out to you, but fans of the Game of Thrones TV show would know him as Maester Aemon from the Night's Watch. That's his sort of most recent performance before he passed away in 2016. But yeah, like he sort of burst back on the screen with that. But he's been in a couple of spy films we've looked at in the past as well. It's not his first time on the show. I just wanted to sort of jump on because I agreed to both of those, and I think they're both fantastic performers. I think another character who pops up in this, another actor I should say that pops up in this, I think we actually mentioned the film already, and that's Edward Fox.
Yeah.
It's a smaller role, but the charisma of Edward Fox shows through in this film. Like when he's pretending to be from like the embassy and he picks up Frank Sinatra from the police station, I guess that's what it is. Like he's just got a twinkle in his eye and you kind of want to see a bit more of him.
You can see the seeds planted for what he would do with like Day of the Jackal.
Yeah.
Like this is clearly a guy, if you were just to watch this movie, you go, that guy could make Day of the Jackal work. He has all the necessary ingredients we're looking for. And I did have to wonder as I was watching the movie and then doing the research after and hearing about Frank Sinatra's kind of indifference to the project in a lot of ways. There's a lot of material really emphasizing Slattery and Hartman. Like they are given a lot of screen time. And I almost wonder if it was like making up for the fact that Frank Sinatra wasn't around so much, so they kind of boosted up those guys' roles and presence in the movie. I mean, I have no way of knowing. I'd have to see the original script and really judge it off of that. But it felt like when the movie's said and done, it's not just the fact that like their characters are more dynamic. I just had way more of an impression of their role throughout the story than I really did with Frank Sinatra's.
Well, that's because they had agency. They actually were able to chart the course of the story, whereas Frank Sinatra is just, I mean, he's the audience sort of cipher. You could pretend to be him for the film, but I think a lot of people watching that thinking that they would be in Frank Sinatra's shoes, instead of being like, oh yeah, that's what I'd do, you sitting there and going, oh no, I would do it differently. And that's not what you want. Like if you're watching James Bond, for instance, he's sat having dinner with Dr. No, and then you want him to punch the guy in the face, and that's kind of what he does. Like he fights back. Whereas in this film, if Frank Sinatra was out to dinner with Dr. No, he'd probably just sit there and eat the meal.
Yeah, there's never a moment where he like tries to outsmart the people who are manipulating him.
No.
My favorite moment of like this is so checked out Frank Sinatra is the moment where there's like the female contact he goes to stay in the hotel with.
Yeah.
And she like gets changed into like a blue nightie, and it's clear, there's kind of a seduction thing. He's like, I'm tired, I'm going to bed. And I was like, yeah, that's about where we are right now.
You keep using that excuse on me, Cam, and I don't particularly enjoy it.
The blue nightie isn't as flattering on you.
I even dressed up with the little choker like Tatiana, but it's just not an interest to you.
No. There's no love in this journey from Russia.
My mouth's not big enough, clearly.
Yeah.
But yeah, that it's a real shame with Frank. But I agree in terms of those actors. I think they're all tremendous. In terms of the I want to highlight, and actually, you said you had a few, so I'll probably throw it back to you. I actually have only got really one more I wanted to mention. Apart from those, I had those names written down as well. Is I love the premise of this film. I think the delivery is poor, but I think the premise is great. I think the script is probably poor too. It's probably based, the book is probably what's the best bit here, I would imagine. I haven't read it, but you can guys let us know if you've read the original book. Do you think it's better? But yeah, this whole this side of manipulation that happens in the world of spies, sort of this amorality of it all, this, leaving people out in the cold. The reality of spy work, really. It's not the glossy Hollywood veneer that we show in things like Bond and Mission Impossible, that sort of stuff like that. This is actually really what happens. People get burnt a lot of the time.
I also wonder too, this was 4 years after the JFK assassination, and there was all the theories around Lee Harvey Oswald, whether he was a patsy for that assassination. And I don't know if those conspiracy theories or that kind of that kind of exploration as to what his role was had had really kicked into gear at this point. But I know that like there was an appeal to kind of examining kind of the patsy, the guy who was set up for an assassination.
Sure.
And it feels very like kind of like timely to tackle that kind of story. I just don't think they did it well. I kept being reminded watching this of, it's a spy movie we watched. We have not covered on the show, but we both watched it for an interview. And it was, I'm going to keep it a little vague because I don't want to give away our thoughts on it to people, but it was a Kirk Douglas movie from the 70s, I think. And
oh yeah,
I just kept thinking about that movie when I was watching this, when I was comparing kind of the energy level and how engaged I was with the material.
Yeah.
Because it really felt like those movies were just very shaggy and kind of like, ugh, this is very, like this does not have it.
It's like they've got the star there, and that's what they're hoping on. But other than that, there's no, like, he has no, Kirk Douglas makes no effort in that film.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great parallel because they both have like no pace to them, and both of their leads feel like they're just dragging their heels.
And you look at the years they're coming out and the kind of the pedigree of the filmmakers, and you go like, this doesn't make sense. Why does it look like this? Mm-hmm. It looks just kind of like, like there's no life on screen.
There's no passion to it. No, I agree. But like just going back to the I just like seeing this side of spy movies. We don't often get here, and I think like it's more to do with just how many of these types of spy films have been made over the years. So a lot of what we put out tends to be more towards the action side of things, but that's just law of averages of what's been created. So it's nice to have something that actually deals with the darker sides of spy work, and I think that side of the story is really fascinating. And that's why, ultimately I think that there is a really great premise here. It just isn't isn't fleshed out properly, and again, there's a lot of faults that we'll get to. But yeah, I love what this film was trying to do.
And there are bursts of direction, I think, that are impressive. I like a lot of the shot choices. I like a lot of the unconventional framing, things that make me go like, I'm watching kind of a boring scene, but it's shot in an interesting way.
Sure.
Like the interrogation, for example, where you're just like staring up at both Hartman and Laker during a conversation. Like things like that kind of kept me engaged, but the material was really leaving them out to dry. It was entirely visual imagination. But there was one sequence I thought was actually quite effective, which was that assassination, which when we actually get to it, there is a tenseness to it that I was like, oh, like this is actually kind of effective way they're setting it up very methodically. It's almost like a procedural moment of setting up an assassination. It's not played as like super over the top Hollywood action kind of stuff.
Yeah.
It's kind of like a down and dirty, things go wrong, he's got to improvise. That was the kind of moment where I'm like, more of this, please. Like, where was this kind of energy the rest of the film?
Well, I think the concept was they wanted to get the assassin back. That's what he did during World War II. He was a sniper.
Yeah.
They wanted to get that cold-hearted energy back, and so they twisted him to the point where he gave up and became that sort of, the blunt instrument, if we're going to use that analogy. So it was nice to see him actually finally become that, but you almost kind of want to have seen it earlier.
Yeah.
Like him having to forcibly do it somehow, like having to beat someone up or something, like channel that energy somehow. But yeah, that moment is great, and like he improvises. I was trying to figure out what he was doing with those bricks. I'm not a gun guy, so I don't really understand that. If anyone has watched the film and has listened to this, drop me a message, drop us an email, spyhardspod@gmail.com, what was going on with that, because I'm not too sure.
Yeah, I didn't really understand the brick thing either.
No, I'm guessing it's to do with distances. And measuring the amount of time it takes to get, like, I can judge someone's speed by how long it takes them to go from one brick to the other.
Yeah, as opposed to just like a straight line where you can't gauge something visually. Yeah, that makes sense.
That's where my head took it, but like I don't work with guns. I don't know.
Yeah.
We interrupt this program to bring you a special report.
Attention, SpyHards, diehards. Independent podcasting, much like the spy game, requires considerable resources, whether it's research, equipment, hosting, or of course constructing a hidden moon base. We're putting out the call for your support.
That's right, the SpyHards Patreon is the home to our ever-growing lineup of Agents in the Field episodes where we decode non-spy films from your favorite spy actors, and The Debrief, where we activate our billion-dollar brains and predict how the spy movie news of today will shape tomorrow.
Cam, what have we got in our crosshairs this month?
Ho, ho, ho. It's time for some Christmas content on the SpyHards Patreon, and this week we are going to review the 1971 police thriller, The French Connection, directed by William Friedkin. After all, who's more jolly than Gene Hackman?
So accept your mission and hop in the Helmmobile today at patreon.com/spyhards. But before Spectre agents intercept this broadcast, let's get back to the Spy Jinx. Okay, Cam, we've laid some of them out already, but let's talk about dislikes, things that didn't work for us with The Naked Runner. Do you want to take us away?
The plot gets so convoluted in this movie that I literally was struggling to even understand what was going on.
Mm-hmm.
When you had scenes, for example, where Slattery is setting it up. So, as I mentioned that scene earlier, where the blonde contact lady tries to seduce Frank Sinatra, and he goes to bed.
Mm-hmm.
The way they set it up so that when he goes back there, she's going to call the police on him and get him arrested. I'm like, okay, why are we doing this? It just felt like they were constantly trying to come up with reasons to keep his character off balance, but I didn't even understand at a certain point a lot of the machinations they were doing.
There's several moments like that. One that precedes that is the hotel itself. There's this whole to and fro in the background of we have to have this room for some reason.
Room 507. It has to be room 507.
I don't know if it's ever explained why it has to be 507. Maybe that's the one they've wiretapped.
Or was it from a vantage point situation?
But he's not shooting from there.
I know.
Yeah, maybe that was something that was in the book and it was put into the script, but the context was never put into the script, so it's just sort of lost to the viewer and to us analyzing it. But yeah, there's a lot of moments like that where you just sort of scratch your head. There's at one point, right at the assassination, they say, "Oh, there's two cars coming," and then why was there two cars?
I'm not sure about that. Also, who was chasing after Hartman trying to kill him?
No idea.
That scene had me so confused.
Yeah, now you mention it, I have no clue why that even happened. And these are moments, because going back to that old Alfred Hitchcock icebox sort of theory, that's meant to be when you get home after watching a film and you stop and go, wait, why did that happen? This was happening to me during the viewing of the film. I was sitting there questioning decisions, and that shouldn't be happening.
Yeah. There was a lot of moments like that where I would sit there and go okay, hold on. I know I did not fall asleep and just wake up, but I feel like we almost skipped over a scene or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
It just was not connected well. And I don't think it should be well, of course you don't understand. The only person that would truly understand would be the Slattery character because he's the mastermind. But no, that's not acceptable. You have to have some sort of blueprint so that we can understand where he's taking our character. If their whole goal was to have us as disoriented as Frank Sinatra, congratulations, I guess. Mm-hmm. But I looked about as happy by the end as Frank Sinatra did through most of this movie.
Yeah, I for instance, when there was this talk about getting the gun off of him at the airport going back to Leipzig.
Yeah.
I have no idea why they wanted to get the gun off him if the objective was for him to use the gun.
Okay, I think here was my initial thought.
Okay.
Maybe I'm wrong. The movie doesn't really answer this question. Was that his purpose was to smuggle the gun and that there was supposed to be a handoff and Edward Fox was going to be the one that actually committed the murder?
But then why send him in the first place?
I don't know. As maybe more of a courier? An unknown courier?
But then that question is applicable to a lot of the film. Because they go to amazing efforts to conduct this assassination.
Yeah.
When quite frankly, there's two guys waiting around the corner in a car. Both of them could have done it.
Also, the target they're after is not the most brilliant of criminal masterminds or something. He's just this kind of nerdy scientist dude that may have some information.
Mm-hmm.
I was making notes. I'm where's our Bourne asset characters? It's can you take out this guy really quietly? Great, done, no problem. As opposed to grabbing a chair salesman who, yes, he served in World War II 20-something years ago, but this seems like a lot of work to go to for what seems to me like it would be actually a pretty easy target. This is not a huge public assassination. This is not, the
Day of the Jackal.
Day of the Jackal, or also the one you mentioned earlier with Warren Beatty that I'm totally...
Parallax View.
Thank you, parallax view. Like, that is not the case with these assassinations. This is a very quiet situation. I didn't understand the completely convoluted, loopholes they were running through to stage this. It didn't make any sense.
No, and to make matters even worse, if they couldn't already, the whole reason they go into these efforts to make this sort of convoluted plan to get the assassination to happen is because the supposition is that the Russians, the Soviets, are very smart and ahead of the game, trying to take this person they were extracting out of Belmarsh prison and get him back to the USSR. For most of this journey, they're like on trains, they're smuggling him around, they hide out on a farm for a little while. But then, to facilitate the fact that it's a shootout, they have him jump in a car in a very open area and drive straight through it. Like, they're being super sneaky until it's convenient for the film for them to be like, oh, they're idiots now.
Yeah. I thought it was really head-scratching. And also, like, if you're going to have a situation where you want to set up, like, a patsy, as kind of the concept of the movie is, in theory, you want the patsy to be in a situation where they're going to get pointed to and be like, it was that guy.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's the guy who did it. Versus a very quiet, deserted road with no one around. Like, who cares who does it at this point?
Yeah, because it could have been literally anyone. There's no witnesses.
Yeah, there's no one around at all. It's like, it's just barren territory.
And if you're going to do that, by that point, we already had trip mines.
That's true. That's also true, yeah.
Could have just blown the car up.
Not only that, he shoots that car, it blows up.
Mm-hmm.
There are two people waiting there to extract him mere steps away.
Pass. Don't worry, Cam. The film has ended by this point. You're not meant to be asking these questions.
No, that's true. And Colonel Hartman is one of them, I believe.
Yeah.
And it's like, he seemed more than capable of taking out this car, considering earlier in the movie we saw him take out another car with a machine gun.
Yeah. There's no reason why he couldn't have been on that grassy knoll. We could sit here and pull it to pieces, but basically, it's a shoddy script.
It really is. And it's enlivened only by, I think, Sidney J. Furie's style. And just like, how do I make this moment visually interesting? I'm going to try everything I have in my bag of tricks to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And then a couple performances that really leap off the screen. But even like there was the dramatic element also of this woman that Frank Sinatra had worked with in World War II.
Yeah.
Who got ill in the hills, as I noted, and he thought she died. Mm-hmm. And is brought back into his life. This should feel like such a dramatic reveal of having her back in this, this encounter, this kind of reunion between the two. And like, where does that character even go?
It's actually, the character's name is Karen Jasivius. It's actually her last acting role.
Is it really? Nadia Gray. Okay.
Yeah. But no, like there's this whole setup. There's this emotional meeting in a clock shop, a clockmaker shop or a watchmaker shop. And like this long lost love. They talk about how Frank Sinatra's wife had died years ago. So they make a point of saying he's single and it's okay for him to mingle. But you never see any follow-up.
No, and there's not a lot of sparks on screen also when you put these two together in a moment. I think my favorite thing that she contributed was really the scene where he is being held by Hartman and she does the like slow walk into the room. And just the sound of her, high heels on the ground walking in, I thought was very effective. And they have her off in the background getting closer and closer in frame. Again, really well shot moment, but in terms of dramatic impact of that character, not a lot going on.
I did like that interrogation scene. I think that was quite good. Like, seeing Frank Sinatra up against it, having to sort of get his story taken apart by someone who clearly knows a lot more than him is a good bit of sort of investigative work. The thing I wanted to point out, not point out, we've already kind of said it, but I think Frank Sinatra was just miscast.
He's, I think, a little too old because he was about 50 at the time.
Sure.
And they're setting up that he was someone in World War II. So, like, you take off 20 years, he's 30. That's fine, but, like, Frank Sinatra at 50 is a Frank Sinatra who has lived, 50 years of Frank Sinatra's life.
His liver is 80.
That's right, yeah. Like, this man has lived many lifetimes. And so I just felt like he seems a little too old for someone who just was out of the war for 20 years. And maybe that's the case for a lot of the cast, actually, because you also have, like, Vaughan, Martin Slattery does not look like a spring chicken himself either. But I just felt like maybe you want someone who seems a little more upwardly mobile in this movie as a potential assassin than Frank Sinatra, who, at least in this movie, doesn't seem to have a lot of energy and conveys a very tired, older presence. And, like, the thing is, I've seen Frank Sinatra in many musicals.
Yeah.
The man is a virtuoso in, like, a dance scene or a musical moment in a really well-staged musical. But, like, here, I'm sure that he's trying to get inside of someone who's just kind of broken down to a certain degree, but, like, it just feels like it just slows the movie down.
I mean, you cast someone slightly younger, slightly more virile, like, I don't know, Rod Taylor around this time. I'm keeping it to The Liquidator because apparently I love that film. But just someone like, not an action man, but like can do sort of physicality. It just feels more genuine. Like this feels like a very proto version of Taken.
Yeah.
You got the old man coming back into action one last time, that sort of thing. I don't know. We've spoken about the ending being terrible, whether that's to do with editing, lack of having product to work with in the editing bay, or maybe that's just how the book ends. Like it's just, oh, that's it, we're done. I don't know, but like I think for me we've sort of tackled my dislikes already.
Yeah, that kind of like sums up just going through like the script issues, the Frank Sinatra casting and performance, just the pace issues. It just feels like a movie that like Sidney J. Furie and his cinematographer were so locked in on the visual design of the movie and kind of creating the world of the movie that when it came to actual storytelling, it just did not connect. And maybe they just didn't have particularly strong material to work with in the first place.
Yeah, that's most likely it. It's a real shame because on paper, this should have been quite an interesting film.
Yeah, on paper, this should be like a no-brainer. When I look at a movie like Suddenly, the one I mentioned earlier with Frank Sinatra, it's kind of like the B-movie version of this. Like, this is I think like an A-level movie that just falls apart.
Yeah.
But like production-wise, it's pretty top tier. Whereas like Suddenly was a little more of a B-movie. But it had so much more tension. It was also about setting up someone to commit an assassination they didn't want to commit. And, it's just kind of like a down and dirty, single location almost movie. It's like set in a house. And I just remember enjoying that movie so much more.
I completely buy it. This just feels like a misfire. It's a really unfortunate one when you know what ingredients they used. That's it really. But before we get to the knock list, I've got to ask about any final notes. Cam, do you have anything for us?
I had a big one actually, which is a Sidney J. Furie trademark in this movie when it comes to his spy films. And look, there's a ton in here. We're framing shots with like red chairs between the actors. Like there's all sorts of crazy stuff visually going on. But there is a moment that made me smile really wide, which is there is a like pass off with like important intel of two guys standing in a field watching a marching band. And I was immediately transported back to Major Dalby just loving it up at a marching band performance in a park.
I knew you were going to mention that marching band. One of my questions at the end was going to be, what is it with spies meeting at weird concerts?
Right? That seems to be a thing.
It's a Sidney J. Furieism, I think.
I think so too. And another thing I actually enjoyed about the movie, it's a very small performance, but there's an actor who plays basically a Peter Lorre type.
Yeah.
Who shows up, and he's the one that talks to Frank Sinatra about the son being kidnapped. And he says it in this very just like, it's almost like this very like mild-mannered voice. It's not particularly threatening, but because it's so mild-mannered, it becomes threatening.
That's the Peter Lorre special right there, isn't it? Like he has that voice. It's just like unnerving.
Yeah.
Yeah. Two things I want to bring up towards the end. One's more of a note and then more of a question afterwards. It was nice to see a little bit of Copenhagen. I'm not sure if they actually shot in Tivoli Gardens. It looked like they did.
I think they did, yeah.
Because I've been there and Tivoli is lovely. So it was nice to actually see that because we recently spoke about Matt Helm going to Copenhagen and he never once went there.
And I liked that this movie had sort of an unglamorous glamour to it.
Mhm.
It went to famous locations, but it did not try to make them look like a Bond movie. It kind of captured that working class aesthetic that Sidney J. Furie seems to like.
No, but you did, and this is a real deep cut here, but a little bit of a Bond connection for everyone. You see Frank Sinatra's house at the start of the film. He's living in like a high-rise apartment that looks over the River Thames.
Yeah.
And I was looking at him in that apartment. It's like, I've seen it before. Where have I seen that apartment before? And it's a pretty famous building. And you and I have actually walked next to it in our little London travels, funnily enough. We didn't know we were doing the Naked Runner tour of London. But luckily, we didn't wear clothes that day, so at least we were dressed.
That's right. Who knew, right? We chose wisely.
I couldn't figure out why for a little while, and then it struck me. Have you ever seen the TV show Secret Diary of a Cool Girl?
No, I haven't.
Okay, it's based on a book, I think a series of books with Billy Piper. But on a couple of episodes, Colin Salmon stops by as a high-ranking MP in the British Parliament, and he is living in the exact same room, that same house. They shot it in the same place, and I was like,
oh, that's interesting.
Why did my memory remember that? But like, I went and found a shot and put it next to each other, and that's, bang on.
Oh, wow. What an odd connection between the secret life of a call girl and the Naked Runner.
Yeah. Well, a lot of naked activities there, I suppose.
Fair enough.
A lot of stuff being very, very breezy.
Another note I had was at one point Frank Sinatra meets with that blonde contact, and she sees him and says, "Your picture didn't do you justice." And I was like, how bad was that photo?
I wish old Blue Eyes would go back. Oh, God.
Yeah, I was like, oh, my God. Like,
I really don't like the way you look tonight.
Yeah. Wow.
I wish you were a stranger in the night.
Yeah.
Please don't come fly with me. You make me feel so old. Love's not been good to me. I'm out. I'm done. I could keep going.
Okay.
I did it my way. The last note I've got is more of a question. And we've recently seen some interesting vocations for our spies and assassins in their real life. Recently, we had Dr. Jonathan Hemlock, who is an art appraiser and teacher turned assassin in the Eiger Sanction, but is chair designer turned assassin officially our weirdest so far?
It kind of is, yeah. Like, this one did jump out to me as very strange. So I think that one may... and it's funny because there's a movie on our list to cover in the future called The Chairman, and it's not this movie.
Oh yeah. He should be the chairman, shouldn't he? He should be.
He should, yeah.
Well, Cam, the time has finally come. Let's dance the Chattanooga Choo Choo and talk about The Naked Runner. Is it making the knock list? And the blank look on your face says to me you don't remember that line from the film.
No, I do remember the line, actually.
You just no-sold me there. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah. No. Didn't we talk about the Chattanooga Choo Choo when we did the Great Locomotive Chase as well?
I mean, it's a dance from wartime, but I think the Great Locomotive Chase is Civil War, so that's pre-World Wars.
I feel like that one actually had a Chattanooga Choo Choo, though.
To the Google Mobile. I think, Cam, so I've Googled and I've come back, and I think what I can say is Chattanooga was a place that was mentioned in the Great Locomotive Chase.
Okay, fair enough.
The song, the Chattanooga Choo Choo, and dance, and the film are all from 1941. So it's a World War II thing, basically. That's what this film inferred. So
okay.
Slight diversion there, folks, but I hope you enjoyed the Chattanooga Choo Choo. I actually don't know what it is. I kind of want to see what the dance is. Is it like the Cha-Cha Slide?
I have no idea what that is either.
You don't know what the Cha-Cha Slide is?
No. I'm old, but I'm not that old, I guess.
Okay, apparently. But okay, so The Naked Runner, what do you think?
No, this isn't making the knock list. I wanted to love this movie when I saw Sidney J. Furie directed it.
Mm-hmm.
And I've liked Frank Sinatra and a lot of other things, but oh boy, this one's it's so frustrating. This is one of the most frustrating movies I've watched for this podcast in quite some time.
It wasn't so much, it was quite frustrating for me too. I don't have that sort of built-in love for Sidney J. Furie that you do because of the Ipcris file. So for me, learning that he was part of this, I think I still went in with my guard up a bit more than you did. But like knowing that, I mean, I still voted yes for the Ipcris file making the knock list. I can recognize quality when it exists. It just didn't work for me necessarily. But I just felt like it was such a waste. There was so much left on the page, on the screen. So much more could have been done with this film in different hands. Maybe still with Sidney J. Furie, maybe different script writer, different lead actor. But yeah, I understand what you mean.
Yeah, it was just a kind of a bummer one where, when I saw that one on our master list, I'm like, oh, cool, Frank Sinatra spy film. What could this be? This was not what I expected to sit through. And I don't mean because it wasn't delivering a premise I expected, just when it came to the overall product, I was like, boy, this is not up to snuff.
Okay, so that's one no from Cam. I still get a vote, of course, but I think it's pretty simple. It's a no from me too. There are bits of this film that work. We've called it out. Performances, there's a few shots here and there. The premise is pretty solid, but the delivery is such a mess. It's so flat. It's an hour and 40 minutes of you just sort of watching it as if it were a documentary. You don't really get invested with the characters. You honestly don't care what happens, if the assassination happens or not by the end. And you know that the kid's alive, as Cam pointed out, so there's no tension from that either. And so you're just left with this sort of shrug of an ending that's a ripcord basically out of nowhere anyway, and then you cut to credits. It's just a crazy set of choices that led to this point. And in another world, another parallel universe, this could have been, I think, quite a good film.
Yeah, who knows, right? Like, alternate universe, sure, and maybe in that world, The Naked Runner is available to watch for people.
Yeah, don't worry, folks, it's on YouTube, but yeah, it's a no from me as well. And as such, The Naked Runner is not making the knock list. The dossier on the film is complete and filed as classified. Now, Cam, before I hit you with the usual question, I do have a special announcement, because later this week we have an extra special Spy Master interview coming your way for all of you 60s Spy TV fans out there. Joining us on Friday this week is none other than Agent 99 herself, Miss Barbara Feldon. She's on to talk to us about her new book, Getting Smarter, a memoir, along with some wonderful memories of working on Get Smart, plus some stories of Dean Martin and The Man from U.N.C.L.E. Plenty to enjoy coming to the podcast feed this Friday. But Cam, over to you. What are we talking about next week?
Christmas is basically around the corner at the time of recording this. And so every year we celebrate with a Christmas movie. And so in the past, we talked about On Her Majesty's Secret Service. We talked about The Package. And this year, we're going to kick off a franchise. We're going to look at the 2010 Bruce Willis film, Red, which, yes, in case you've forgotten, is set at Christmas.
Yeah, and of course, we also tackled The Long Kiss Goodnight a few years ago as well. So we're keeping that tradition going, a festive tradition here on SpyHards of looking at some festive... Is it festspionage?
Ooh, I like that. Yeah, let's stick with that.
Festspionage. I'll be using that on social media. So yeah, your mission, folks, should you choose to accept it, is to join us next week as we ring in Christmas 2023 style with Red, Retired and Extremely Dangerous, from 2010. And if you like what you heard on the show, please consider leaving us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts and becoming a SpyHards Die Hard. And now, Vinny, this week's SpyHard Die Hard is now officially The Naked Runner. I hope you enjoy that code name, Vinny. And get your code name by leaving us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. And if you like what you heard on this episode, please consider supporting us over on our Patreon page. There's a bunch of different entry levels where you can show your love for SpyHards, and over 50 bonus episodes available. Check it out on patreon.com/SpyHards. And don't forget to follow us discreetly on social media at SpyHards. That's SpyHards on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and even TikTok now. But until next week, folks, Laker has left Chromadeca.